Good evening. Welcome to workshop number 2 in a 3-workshop series. The focus of tonight's workshop is emergency preparedness. We're glad to see everyone here. This is a very important subject for all communities, but especially West Sacramento. You know, we have a lot of great things happening in West Sacramento. As you know, it's a wonderful place to live. I've enjoyed the little over 2+ years I've lived here, so I'm a relative newcomer, but it's a wonderful place to live, and one of the great assets of the community are the waterways in the region. But with anything, there's two sides to every issue, and so it's a situation that we have to be aware of and learn to manage and prepare ourselves for potential disasters. And so tonight's session, by the time we're done, you're going to be well prepared and have the information and materials to prepare yourself, your neighbors, your family members, your community, and to be able to cope with a disaster should one occur in West Sacramento. You know, although a lot of the focus in the news, especially since Hurricane Katrina and the situation in New Orleans, has been focused on floods. But the information we're giving you tonight is not necessarily directly only for floods. It's general information that applies to any kind of disaster that might occur in a community. Some of the advantage in a flood situation, in most flooding situations, is there's some notice that a flooded situation is getting worse. Normally we have a series of storms, the water starts to rise, there's alerts that go out, and so there's some types of notice, and that's kind of the positive side of that kind of situation. But we have some types of situations that may come up with no notice at all, and so we really need to be prepared in those types of situations. I think it's no secret we live in an urban area. There are all kinds of rail traffic, vehicle traffic that pass through here. Anybody knows in modern society, there's all kinds of chemicals on the rails and the roads. That's a real potential. We're actually, the edge of the city is on the flight path of the international airport. So there's lots of potentials here. Not that they're necessarily likely, but that's what disaster preparation is all about. It's being prepared for the unlikely things so that you can become an asset in that situation in caring for yourself, your family, your neighbors, and then possibly we may even enlist you to be a help in the situation with us, as we need volunteers. And so it's important to be prepared before you can do that. So that's gives you a flavor of why we think this is a very important event and why we're glad to see you here. This is just kind of the opening salvo in this campaign to help people be aware and to get prepared. And so we'll be having more types of information and meetings on this particular subject, but it felt it was really appropriate and fit in really well with the series of workshops based on what's going on with the levee evaluations and the bringing levees up to standards and the associated fees that are being considered and the elections that are going to be coming up. So it fit right in that whole thing, and so we wanted to blend it in and talk about it. There are some people in the audience that I'd like you to introduce to you tonight. First, we have one of our city council persons here. Mark Johannesson, our newest city council person, is right here in the back. Mark, thank you for being here. And Will Chow is here in the front. Will is the city's new, Will, is it flood, what's your exact title, I should ask? Flood Protection Manager. So Will Chow, everybody. Will comes with a wealth of experience. And we have a subject matter expert panel that I won't introduce at this time, but they're four gentlemen, esteemed gentlemen sitting in the front here that will be part of the Q&A that we'll be doing later, and they'll be introduced to you at that time. One of the things that we're going to be doing, we're going to be passing around a sheet, and it's going to be optional, but if you would like to sign up on the sheet, we would like to have some contact information from you. The purpose of that sheet is to be able to give you additional information in the future on this subject or other subjects about public safety. So we'd appreciate if you would mind giving us your contact information. And also, again, hopefully if you have an interest in partnering with us, we could use you as a contact person, kind of a leader in your particular neighborhood or street. And so we're looking for partners out there. So if you might even think you might be interested, you can put your contact information on there, and we'll get in touch with you in the future and see if that's a role for you. And if not, that's okay. We can still just disseminate additional information to you. So you'll see that coming around too. There's a lot of talk. One of the things I wanted to touch on before we got going about 100-year flood protection and 200-year flood protection and what those numbers mean. And just the way of putting them in perspective for you. When you hear 100-year flood protection, the typical thought is that it's a flood that will, what? Happen, once in every 100 years. That will happen, right, is what we hear. And then when we hear, 200-year flood, then we think, that's a flooding event that will happen once in every 200 years. And that's the typical way we think of it. But actually, I want to give you another way to think about it, and hopefully it'll motivate you in your preparation. What if I told you there was a 1 in 100 chance that that flood could happen each year? Did you look at it that way? Or what if I told you that there's a 0.5% chance that the 200-year flood could happen in any year? Now that kind of changes it around, because now you're thinking, I'm probably not going to be alive when that 1 in 100 year or 1 in 200 year event happens. But if you isolate it down to a 1-year event, you realize, hey, there's a probability anywhere from 0.5% to 1% that it could happen in that year. Well, that's still not a great probability, but isn't it something that you want to be prepared for? Isn't it something that you want to protect your home, your pets, as we said, some of your possessions, some of your keepsakes, to prepare yourselves for those kinds of eventualities? I think so. I think it's well worth the time. We buy all types of insurance for those kinds of eventualities, and actually the probability of some of those things happening are much less than 1% a year or 0.5% a year, and yet we go to the time and effort and expense to buy insurance. So look at this tonight as insurance, and it's actually free insurance in the sense of all it costs you is a little time, a little preparation, but you're going to have the materials and the information to do that. And so we think that's very important, and just for a way to emphasize how important this subject is. We did this tonight. This is not just a police department type of event. It's a citywide effort. All the city departments, most of the city departments are involved in this effort, and it's under Will's leadership as the flood protection manager. And the reason police are leading this particular session is that police have the responsibility for coordination of evacuations. So I notice we're not the whole show, but we have the responsibility to help you be prepared and to coordinate those kinds of things. We have our brethren in the fire service with us tonight, and they have a responsibility, primary responsibility, to coordinate rescue. And of course, there's a difference between evacuation and rescue. Hopefully, if we do a good job in preparation, they won't have to do as much rescue. As you can see the difference between those situations. And so there's Public Works Department, there is I'm missing a lot of other departments that are involved in the planning of this event. But it's really a citywide effort. One of the things I want to remind you of, we're going to do some question and answer, but it will not be from the floor. What we're going to do is there's cards, and we'd like you to fill out a card. You may have received those cards, or look to Angie if she's here somewhere. She's probably stepped out. But there'll be cards, and they're over on the side if you haven't gotten one when you came in. And you can write your questions down. There'll be a short break at the end of the presentations. We'll collect those cards. We'll sort them and group them, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end based on the cards. And at the end of the whole session, when we dismiss, we'll have some informal time for you to ask questions of some of us. You can approach us. We'll be here. We'll be outside with some of the displays that you've seen out there, and so that'll be part of the program tonight. Okay? All right. Well, we have a very full agenda planned for you, and although the purpose of tonight is talk about disaster preparation, emergency preparedness, we are going to give you a quick overview of some of the issues about the levees and the evaluations that are taking place, some of the potential flood patterns. We all know that, like I said, the things we love about West Sacramento, the waterways and all the beautiful things about the city, some of those things have issues connected with them, and some of those potential flood patterns we'll talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about the financing quickly. We have someone here to do that. And so we'll talk about some of those, and then we'll get into the meat of the event. And that little introduction piece is what a lot of that was covered in session 1 if you couldn't make that first session. So we just wanted to give you a flavor of what was covered in that. I'm going to do some introductions now for the main speakers, and there's going to be 3, and I'm just going to do them all at once, and then I will sit down and you will not see me until the end. After that. So I'll do all those right now. And I'm going to start in order that they're going to appear up here. And Mr. Chris Kravanek is here. And Chris, stand up and just wave your hand there. Thank you, Chris. Chris is a licensed civil engineer. He's a geotechnical engineer in the state of California. He works for the firm of HDR, which is contracted to the city of West Sacramento for this project. He's a recognized expert in levee evaluations and seepage mitigation. And you can ask him what that means. During his 15-year career, he has served as a project manager and an engineer on a wide variety of water resource projects, including planning, design, and construction of numerous levee improvements. He has extensive experience working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the California Department of Water Resources and other local governments in the evaluation and remedy of flood protection levees in the Northern California area. So he knows our area. Mr. Kravanek is serving as the project engineer, as we said, for the firm HDR on the levee evaluation team for West Sacramento. So he will lead things off. The second speaker will be a city, staff person, and it will be Shanna Zuspan. Shanna is a senior redevelopment program manager. And she's with the city and is helping to develop the overall financing plan for this flood protection program for West Sacramento. And she'll give a brief update on that effort. Well, as we said, that's not the focus. Our main speaker for the evening will be Deputy Chief of Police Henry Serrano. The Deputy Chief has been with us in West Sacramento. Did you raise your hand over there, Henry? He's been with us for about 1.5 years, and he came to us after a long and successful career with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. He was a 30-year person there. He retired at the rank of Chief Deputy, which is a very high level, the highest you can go without being elected or appointed. They have an elected sheriff and an appointed undersheriff. Other than that, the highest you can go is a Chief Deputy, and the Deputy Chief achieved that rank before coming over here. The true benefit, though, of having him involved in this and why he's really the lead on this for the police department is his experience in the homeland security area and disaster preparation kinds of areas. After he left the Sheriff's Department, he did a tour in the Sacramento Office of Homeland Security. And so as that, he brings that experience with him to the job, and so he's well prepared to talk about emergency preparedness. So with that, I think I've covered all my duties unless somebody gives me another one. And I'll introduce Deputy Chief. No, I will not. I'm sorry. I will introduce Chris Kravanek. I'm sorry, Chris. Come on up. And Chris is going to start off, and followed by Shanna after that, and then the Deputy Chief. Welcome.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, if we could have the next slide. There we go. As Chief said, thanks for having me this evening. I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about where the city is in their evaluations of the levee system and I won't go into too much of the technical detail tonight. We had our first workshop back in late March, and we spent a lot of time going through how we're doing the evaluations and what we're finding, and I'm just going to kind of do an overview tonight. But we will have a kind of a breakout session afterward. We've got a poster put up of some of the repairs we're anticipating, and be happy to answer any questions at that time and go into some of the details. But what this slide here shows is, as you guys know, the city of West Sacramento is surrounded by waters. You've got the Sacramento River here to the east, Sacramento Bypass to the north, the Yolo Bypass all the way down here to the west. Of course, we've got the port area here in the middle. And then this feature here, the Deepwater Ship Channel that actually extends 22 miles to the south down into the Delta area. And as we're going into the evaluation of the flood protection for the entire basin of the city of West Sacramento, we're considering all of these features. Next slide, please. This is a kind of a schematic here of some of the preliminary levee evaluation findings that we have and some of the alternatives we're considering. We actually have a poster of this, which we can talk about after. But what I wanted to mention here is that the city has moved out on an aggressive program of evaluating the entire flood protection system, the entire levee system. And we're teaming with the Department of Water Resources. As many of you know, they have a very extensive program at evaluating levees up and down the Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. And one of their top priorities is the city of West Sacramento. And DWR and their team, they're evaluating the levees up here to the north, and we've been evaluating all the levees here to the south, including the port area and the Deepwater Ship Canal. And the evaluation's really been in two parts. The first part is what we call problem identification. And in that, we've been out in the field. You may have seen on the levees a number of drill rigs out there doing borings, characterizing the materials of the levee and the ground underneath the levee. And been out doing surveys and checking what we anticipate, as the chief had mentioned, both the 100-year and the 200-year water surfaces that will be passing through the system here. Then checking the geometry of the levees and making sure that the levee system can withstand such an event. And as we come up with this problem identification report, we do just that. We identify where the issues are. After that part of the reporting, we then move into, well, now that we have this problem, what are the solutions going to be? What are the possible alternatives to repair the levees in this area? And we move into what we call an alternatives analysis report and try to come up with the best solutions, which are the things that are listed here in these boxes. Like, for example, on Reach 1 here, you're looking at flattening the slopes of the levee, putting in some erosion protection, some rock protection in the river, perhaps some cutoff walls, and I'll talk briefly about a few of these. Do we need to set the levee back at all? Do we put these seepage berms in? And we look at not only the engineering solutions, but a big factor, what are the costs of these systems that we want to put in, as well as what are the impacts on existing development and planned development? What are the environmental impacts of undertaking such a project? So we're going through all of these alternatives in conjunction with the DWR team, and we're also working very closely with the Corps of Engineers. They're the ones that have established the criteria against which we're evaluating these levees. So they're reviewing all of our work, and we're trying to come to some kind of concurrence of what's the best system, what's the best repairs for the entire West Sacramento system. Next slide, please. I want to put up a few pictures here of some typical levee failure mechanisms. One of them on the upper left here is overtopping. Basically, the flood waters get so high in the river channel, it's just coming right over the top of the levee. Another issue we have here in the upper right is wind and high waves coming in. You can imagine, you've all seen the Yolo Bypass when it runs full and how wide that is, and then the waves coming across there. We're evaluating the levees to make sure they can withstand such an event. You may have heard a lot about underseepage. The schematic here on the lower picture kind of represents what underseepage might look like. It's really when the river comes up on this side, the water pressure is such that it's driving water pressures underneath the levee, and it tries to pop up on the other side. You may have seen sand boils or seeps or things coming through the levee. Something we're very concerned about. The Corps is very concerned about. It's happening all up and down the Central Valley. So we're kind of going through with various engineering models and looking to see where this might be a problem. Next slide, please. These are a couple of slides from DWR. We're also concerned about erosion sites. You can see some erosion here on the levee and some erosion back here. If this were to go unmaintained, unchecked, you can imagine this levee under high flows would just keep getting eroded until eventually you cut right through the levee. Next slide, please. This is a schematic that's cut right through the levee. Here's the levee itself. The river's on this side. So kind of a cross-sectional window here showing some of the geology underneath the levee. And so some of the things that we're concerned about, some of the issues we're looking at. I mentioned underseepage. Another way of looking at it here is if the water's trying to flow underneath the levee or through seepage, the flood water is trying to flow right through the levee itself. How would we come up with repairs to mitigate against that? A couple things you could do. One is putting a cutoff wall in right through the levee. They actually get excavators out there that can dig down 80, or sometimes they have other equipment that can go down 110 feet. And you create basically a low permeability layer right here that blocks those water flows, prevents them from coming through. Another thing you might do is basically build a big berm of dirt on this side here, a seepage berm. So that if you have water trying to go underneath the levee and pop up on the other side, you contain it with these seepage berms. Another issue that we look at is freeboard. Looking at that 100 or 200-year water surface coming through here, make sure this is the freeboard here, from the top of the water surface to the top of the levee. Make sure that we've got adequate freeboard on the levee so these levees aren't going to get overtopped. You saw the pictures of the erosion sites. You can imagine here if the erosion site were in here and it continued to dig back into the levee under flood flows, you would eventually start carving into the levee itself. So we come up with erosion site repairs. We may put rock down in this area and some additional vegetation to kind of stabilize that portion of the levee. One of the other issues that we're looking at, and a lot of you have probably noticed this, that on the Sacramento River especially, a lot of the levees themselves are right on the river and the waterside slopes are very steep. So we get concerned about some kind of a over-steepened slope here that might fail into the river. And so we look at, do we have to lay these slopes back a little bit to provide additional stability? Next slide, please. These are actual pictures from West Sacramento area. This is up north of the I Street Bridge. This is an erosion site here, a bit concerned about. You see they've already placed some rock in this area. This is down in the Southport area. You've got some steep slopes here that kind of go right into the river. Again, some of the things that we're concerned about. Next slide. So where we are in the studies, a lot of the information we have now is preliminary. We're going through this analysis of the alternatives, but by midsummer, we're going to be submitting to the Corps of Engineers and DWR our findings and work with them on coming up with a plan to get all the levee repairs in place as quickly as possible. With that, I'll turn it over to Shanna.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk briefly about sort of where we are with the overall financing plan. As we've heard this evening, tonight's workshop is really focused mostly on the emergency preparedness, but we also heard from Chris that there are some improvements that we'll be looking to make to the flood control system, and to the extent that we try to minimize the chances in the instances where we have to deal with emergency preparedness, we obviously need a financing plan to fund these improvements. So based on the analysis to date, the estimated cost for improving West Sacramento's levees is about $400 million. The funding for those improvements will come through a combination of federal, state, and local dollars, and the improvements will be phased over time. Next slide, please. In terms of the financing plan, I should note that sort of historically, West Sacramento, along with most communities throughout the state that live behind levees, have paid approximately 7 to 10.5% of the total cost to fund levee improvements. The rest of the funds typically comes from the state and federal governments. As we look forward to funding this project, we still anticipate that the majority of funding will come from the federal and state governments, but we know that there will be there will be competition for those funds. Federal dollars may not materialize at the very beginning of the project. We do have some state funds that voters approved back in the fall through Proposition 1E and Proposition 84 there will be significant competition from many communities in California for those funds. So in West Sacramento, we're proposing to be aggressive on our local match and to look to raise essentially about 21% of the total cost locally. And there would be really two sources of funding that we'd be looking at. One is the proposed annual parcel assessment, or an assessment district. Those terms are synonymous. And the second is essentially an in lieu fee program that would allow new development to contribute to the flood protection improvements as well. Just real briefly, in terms of the assessment district, I wanted to give you a little bit of an update. That process is being proposed by the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. It is essentially a vote of all property owners in the city. Ballots will be mailed to all property owners right around May the 22nd with a 45-day return period. Since the last workshop that we have made some progress in identifying what those assessment amounts are, what that formula is based on. You can get that information on our website at westsacfloodprotection.com. There's what's called a draft engineer's report, and that provides a real detailed analysis of what the formula is based on. I should note we also launched today a preliminary assessment calculator. So if you have your assessor's parcel number, or you actually can look it up on the Yolo County website, and there's a link right on the website that allows you to do that, you can actually pull up what your preliminary assessment amount would be. And I just want to reiterate that it's preliminary. The agency board has not yet set the rates or directed the staff to proceed with the balloting, but at least it gives you a sense of kind of what to anticipate. Next slide. So again, just reiterating, there's the website and that the assessment calculator is available. I also want to announce that the May 15th workshop will focus almost exclusively on the proposed assessment, so I encourage you all to come to that if you're interested in learning more. And I will be outside to answer any specific questions about financing that you have. But I'd like to turn it now back over to Police and Fire to go through our emergency preparedness. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming out. I realize anytime you have a meeting at night, you're competing with somebody's favorite television program, so we appreciate your sacrifice in being here. We did want to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that the city's done, some of the things that the community's done, and then some things that you can do for yourself and for your family. I think that's pretty important. First of all, I did want to point out that there is a lot of advanced planning that's already gone into any kind of flood scenario that could happen. And a very detailed plan already exists for the city of West Sacramento should there be any kind of a flooding event. And in what we would call a slow rise flood event, and that's where it keeps raining and the river comes up and up and up and up. There's about a seven-phase plan that's in place that starts off with things as simple as, oh, we hit the number, now we need to start watching, to actual levee patrols, to actually establishing our emergency operations center, to actually starting to evacuate in advance the at-risk populations to the general evacuation of population. So those are some things that are there. Those things exist. It's a good plan. It's been exercised a number of times, and we feel that that would work very, very well. And we will make sure that the public is well informed in the event that something should be occurring along that line. And as the chief said, it could be anything from a flood to a truck turnover to gas leak or whatever. We have things in place that we think would help. Next slide, please. And these are some of the primary ways that we would communicate with you. First of all, the emergency broadcast system. And you've all heard those annoying sounds on your radio or on your television, and then seen the header run across. This last winter, we had it a number of times on the radio. We saw it several times on TV with different thunderstorms and such, and we would certainly be able to use and access those resources for keeping you informed of what was going on in the community. Reverse 911 telephone system. We are lucky enough to be tied in with this urban area of Sacramento under one of the federal funding plans called the UASI. And that has brought us the reverse 911 system. It's in its infancy. It's still being tested out and proven. The bugs are being worked out. But the concept behind reverse 911 is the city has fed in their telephone numbers for our residents and our businesses. And this system can contact up to about 5,000 telephone numbers an hour. to provide a message. So we could put together a message that we wanted you to receive, and at the rate of 5,000 an hour, we could pump that message out. Another thing that you would be seeing for information, this would be a real good one, and one of the gentlemen in the room talked to me last time about the potential of sirens and such, you know, notification sirens like we're back in the 50s and 60s. What we would have is we have access to the regional air resources, both fire and law enforcement, that have pretty strong PA systems. And obviously, if you hear a helicopter hovering over your head saying, you need to plan to evacuate, we hope you would pay attention. That could also be done by fire apparatus or police apparatus. And finally, the city website. There would be information placed on the city website as quickly as possible to get you the best information possible. Now, we also want to talk to you a little bit about the evacuation. I know this map and some of the things you'll see are a little bit difficult to read, but I do want to point out that this presentation in the format you're seeing it tonight exists on the city website. So I would encourage you to go to that. But some things you can see is your more major routes coming out of the neighborhoods feed into the highways, and the principal thing we would want to do is have you very quickly upon notification start to plan on getting out. Now, the reason you don't see arrows on this map is a breach here sets up a different scenario than a breach here. So we want you to be aware the routes are, and we will have signage that will help you and assist you in knowing which way to go should you need to evacuate. Now, another thing that we thought would be key, and I've worked with the Dr. Lawrence, the superintendent of the school district, is on a school evacuation plan. And basically, the school has a wonderful yet very basic and simple plan in place should some flood event occur in the city. And basically what that flood event would be is if there is a flood in the north end of the city, the school will mobilize all of its buses and move the students down into the 3 elementary schools in the south end of the city until the high school is done. Once the high school is done, the new high school, then the new high school becomes the place where the students would be evacuated from the north end of the city. Conversely, if there is a flood in the south end of the city, the schools in the south end of the city, the student population and staff will be moved up to River City High School. So basically, flood north, students move south. Flood south, students move north, and it utilizes the buses, the school buses, as that evacuation process. And again, I can't emphasize enough, the key is if there is a flood, quickly get yourself together and get out of the area that's affected. The trouble is, once you get water about a foot deep, which is only about this high, it becomes very, very difficult to pass. You have cars breaking down, and that is too late to evacuate. So once you get the notice, we need you to start your movement. Now, one thing we did want to cover for you, because this is a concern, the evacuation of at-risk folks, and those could be everyone from folks with different health issues to whatever, perhaps they're in healthcare facilities. The primary responsibility for that rests with the healthcare facility and the family members. Fire and police can assist, but we're pretty overwhelmed with other responsibilities at that time. So it's important to, if your grandmother's in a home, make sure that you've talked to that home and know what the evacuation plan is for that home. The county does have a list, and they have provided it to the city, of all the at-risk folks that we know of in the community. So finally, the last point on that is make sure that if you have someone that's a concern, if grandma's in an old folks home or whatever, please make sure that they are on that at-risk list, and you'll see there's a number there for Yolo County Health Department for you to contact to ensure that actually happens. Now I'd like to move into some things that you can do, and I like this header. Planning for disaster. It's not preparing for the worst. It truly is preparing to do your best when it matters the most. And you think about that. When do you really need to come through? Day to day. Maybe you don't quite get the lawn done, or maybe you forget some things like that, but when it comes to something this significant, you really need to plan ahead and be thinking. Some of the things we want you to think about is your utilities. And I'm sure you've all seen the bizarre pictures that happen during flooding where you see flooding, and in the middle of flood, what do you see? You see a house burning down. You see a business burning down. Well, sometimes that's due to the fact that the utilities, particularly electrical or gas, weren't shut off. Something happens, something ruptures, something sparks, and all of a sudden you have this fire in the middle of a flood. So it's very, very important for you to learn how to do that. Your telephone directory white books contain the turnoffs for gas and electric. Important to learn how to turn off your water. As strange as that sounds, maybe the water only comes up 2 foot on your house, but something ruptures up in the upstairs, and guess what? You individually had a pretty significant flood event. So learn what that water turnoff is, learn how to turn it off. And natural gas, we want to emphasize that should be turned on by PG&E. So please contact them. So again, learn where your gas, your electrical, and your water turnoffs are. If you learn that, it's a very simple process. It should take you maybe 5 minutes to do that, and that's if you're being a little bit on the slow side and taking your time and doing it. So those would be critical things. Another point, very, very significant, and the story that tells me this story the best is I had an opportunity to be at a training session about 6 months ago, and a gentleman who was an emergency planner for New Orleans was there. And he spoke to us about this very problem. And the only time he became choked up and had to stop in his presentation was when he said, you know, I planned everything for the city. I didn't plan for my family. And it was a week into the event before I knew that my family was okay. Can you imagine that? A week? That's a real crisis. So the way we avoid that, agree on some meeting places. One near your home, in case, for example, you have a fire. Somewhere near your home might be a good place to meet. If it's a regional event, you need somewhere away from your home to meet. And again, you think about this, what's the reality today? A lot of homes, both parents work, you have a kid in college, one in junior high school, one in high school, so you've got people in 4 or 5 different locations. Come up with a person outside of your area that everybody has the phone number to. Maybe it's Aunt Mary or Uncle Joe, but you come up with a number that everybody can call. And why is it outside your area? Because the numbers inside that little immediately impacted area become absolutely deluged, and the phone system starts to fail. But if you call outside the region, for example, you call Redding or Los Angeles or your cousin in Utah, the chances of getting through are very, very good. And even though you may not be physically okay, how important is it going to be for you to know that your family members are okay? How much are you going to be able to focus on the things that you need to focus on? If you've been able to call Aunt Mary and Aunt Mary says, yeah, I've heard from all the kids, they're all fine, you guys call me back, we'll work out how we get you together. So the reunion plan, I think psychologically, is as important of a step for you to take as anything else that we'll talk about tonight. Another concept, and we have some examples out here on the back table, and I'd like you to take a look at those. You have 2 different types. You have one that one of our staff member, Martha Griffin, who's out there, put together. And what Martha did is Martha went down to the local store, looked at the list of things, and made some purchases for herself. The other one over on this table was put together by a friend of mine, and this guy's a retired fire marshal, and I mean, everything's state-of-the-art, and he's got MREs and high-tech this and high-tech that. I'm surprised he doesn't have a global navigational system in that thing. But he's got everything out there. So you can look kind of what you can put together on the quick, or what you can put together if you want to go to the extent of MREs and all that sort of stuff. But those are 2 good things. A 72-hour kit is something that you put together to keep at your house. Now, if you're smart about it and you put it in a portable container, you can also take it with you if you have to leave. But this starts to anticipate what it is you would need to be able to comfortably manage the first 72 hours. Because the reality is the government gets criticized for reacting slowly. If you have an event that affects 20 to 30,000 people, the processes that come into play to support that number of population are not instantaneous. And we encourage people to anticipate being basically self-supportive for the first 72 hours. Now, support may come quicker, but if you're prepared for that first 72 hours, you're in pretty good shape. Now, let's take a look at this list. Non-perishable foods, water. You think about that. I'm in a flood. I'm surrounded by water. Yeah, but what else is in that water? You really want to drink that? Do you want to try to wash in it? I don't think so. can openers, portable batteries, flashlights, first aid kit, a whistle. Why would you want a whistle? Everybody's seen the movie Titanic. How are they going to find you if they can't hear you? Warm clothing, rain gear, sanitation, hygiene stuff, special needs for children and seniors. And think about it. If you've got a little one with you, how important is it to have a couple of their favorite toys to keep them occupied? When maybe you're living in a tent or living in your car? I think that's pretty critical. Photo IDs, copy of credit cards, identifications, cash and coins. I can't emphasize that enough. If it's a regional event and we start having electrical outages, what happens to your ATM card? You keep shoving it, but it doesn't go in and it doesn't beep. You don't get any money. So cash and coin. Coin, again, because as silly as it sounds, you may be buying some candy. Maybe you run short of food. Maybe you want to buy something for kids. Maybe you want a soda or whatever else that comes out of a vending machine. Maybe you want to do laundry, and they can't make change. Blankets, sleeping bags, pet supplies. And again, critical, check it every 6 months. Make sure that stuff hasn't been affected or impacted by weather or whatever, or that your kids haven't got in and taken all the granola out. Okay, next concept is a go bag. Very, very similar, almost identical to the 72-hour kit, but this is designed to be portable. And both the applications outside will work as a go bag. And a go bag, the idea is you get that bag and you go. Okay? That's why they call it a go bag. You grab it, you go. You throw it in the car, and you're down the road. You're in the evacuation process. You turn off the utilities. You grab your go bag. You grab the kids. You grab the pets, and you hit the door. You can get ahead of that curve. You don't become part of the incident. And again, I'm not going to run through this list because you have it, but there's a number of things, and again, you have two good examples of these things out back. And again, we want you to know, my wife loves cats, and if I didn't have this slide in, I'd be in trouble when I got home. But plan for your animals, okay? Every time we have a natural disaster, particularly a flood, about 2 to 3 days in, what do you see in the news? Horses, cows, dogs, cats, whatever that weren't evacuated that become part of the problem. And as you get more into the system, believe it or not, these become issues that have to be addressed. So if you plan for your animal, you know, you have all these items together for your animal, you're really in pretty good shape. Now finally, if you can answer all these questions, yep, you're in great shape for an emergency disaster. You know, emergency supplies, no first aid, how to turn off utilities, the evacuation reunification plan, plan for the children and elderly disabled, children's school evacuation we've talked about, flood insurance. Can't emphasize that enough. And the reality is, just really quickly, if you buy flood insurance before the community gets reclassified, it's cheaper than if you buy it afterwards. I believe that's correct, Shauna, is that not? Okay, she's nodding, so I'm okay there. I thought that's what I'd heard before several times. Know your local radio stations for emergency. This is one, you guys, believe it or not, because you're here, you're the leaders in the community, you're now hearing this first. And we're hoping that whether you're formally in a neighborhood watch or not, when your neighbors ask you, hey, what was that all about? Hopefully you can take a couple copies. I think there's going to be extra copies of this stuff. In all candor, if there's none of this stuff left over here when we're done, that's okay. If you want to take a couple extra copies for your neighbors or your kids or whoever, please feel free to do so. And again, the emergency kits, extremely, extremely important. Can't emphasize that enough. And with that, I think we're about ready to turn it back over to the chief for just a little closer. But I do want to emphasize something. We are going to take a break. There are cards over there, and because of the number of people in the room, we're not going to do just a hands-up Q&A. If you want to ask a question, we would ask you to please get on the cards. In fact, these two officers are going to pass out cards. And we'll take about a 4 or 5 minute break and come back where the chief will introduce our panel, and we'll be able to take your questions. But again, we don't want to go into just a free format question and answer from the field. We think we'll get the questions organized much better, and we can break them up amongst the group. If you have a question, please write it down. And how about if we take a break? Yes, ma'am. You raised your hand? Oh, you wanted a card. Okay, great. Okay, you got me. You got me. And you can bring the cards up here, and let's resume at 7:25.
Okay, we're going to reconvene. Get on with some of the Q&A here. Hey, Angie, would you check out front and make sure the folks know we're reconvening? Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, thank you for the questions. We tried to review them quickly, and between the panel that we have up here, which I'll introduce to you, and some others in the room, we'll do our best to answer those. The questions to which we don't know the answer, and so we're going to tell you if we don't know the answer. I want you to know that. We're not going to make up an answer. This is too important of a subject to make up an answer. So if we don't know, we'll do two things. We'll tell you we don't know the answer, and then if you sign the contact list, we will contact you, or we'll get that answer out to the people on the contact list. And an idea that I floated, we got the contact list there, thank you, and we'll see about even being able to post them on the city webpage, some of the questions that came up and some of the answers to that. So we will get you an answer if we don't know the answer. But we'll do our best to answer the questions. And there are people in the room, besides our esteemed panel here that I'll introduce momentarily. There's some others in the room. Hey, one of the people in the room that I didn't introduce at the beginning, many, I guess most of the levies in our West Sacramento area are the responsibility of Reclamation District 900. And Ken Rusich, Ken, can you let us know who you are? Ken is Mr. Reclamation District 900, and so, in fact, I think it'd be appropriate if Ken chimed in on some of these if he feels he's got a lot of experience in this area, and so it's not a disaster prep question so much as it is one of the other areas that was touched on. We'll have some different people. Will Chow will chime in, and as well as our panel. I'm going to quickly introduce these folks to you up here. Now, don't scare them. Don't make them nervous, because they're used to dealing with all difficult situations, but they're not used to speaking in public all the time. So don't intimidate them too badly up there. Don't stare at them too hard. First, I want to introduce, I'll start over here since this is Lieutenant Todd Sockman with the West Sacramento Police Department. Todd is a watch commander, and meaning he's in charge of a particular part of the week and time of the day. Todd is responsible basically for times when things are going to go bad, they go bad at night, and that's Todd's responsibility at night. He's also one of our special events planners, so he has a lot of experience in planning, and so that's why Todd is up here tonight, Lieutenant Sockman. Next to him is Sergeant Trent Tyler, and Trent's claim to fame, he is the supervisor of our traffic and parking safety unit. As you saw from the maps, evacuation routes, street closures, signage, those kinds of things are all part of traffic control. And so Trent has a lot of experience, again, in managing traffic flows through the city. So Sergeant Tyler is on the panel. Next are our esteemed colleagues in the fire department. First, Division Chief Eric Edgar. And Eric is actually in charge of the part of the fire service under prevention, and that makes him actually the fire marshal for the city among his duties. And Bill Summers, and Bill's claim to fame is really as a hazardous materials coordinator, but he is also the city's emergency planner, and he brings a lot of experience. He's retired military, and excuse me, Bill, I think you were a colonel. Is that right? Retired colonel in the military, and so he brings a lot of experience there, and so he helps in the hazardous materials area and emergency planning. So that's our esteemed panel, and as I said, between Will and the Deputy Chief, myself, Ken, and others in the room that are knowledgeable in certain areas, we'll do our best to answer your questions. So with that, I think the Deputy Chief is going to come up here and join me. We're going to kind of read the questions. Hey, how come my stack's bigger than yours?
He and I worked together for 30 years before we came over here, so we actually worked together fairly well. Question number 1. Community Emergency Response Team, CERT. Are you advocates of this program, and why don't you mention this in your program?
Actually, Bill. we are in the process of starting to organize a CERT team. Support is being provided by the regional resource in Sacramento. The first step will be to train people at the local level in the neighborhood. And then from that cadre of people, we will ask if they want to take part in becoming a member of a CERT team, which would have more direct application to supporting the responders in the time of emergency. But we want to first get people trained to take care of themselves, and then we will train them.
And CERT is a volunteer-based program, and the only reason it's not mentioned is because emergency preparedness is a very, very big bag, and we tried to sort it down to just the elements that we thought were most critical for you to have tonight. There's certainly a lot of wonderful programs out there, but we wanted to focus in on what the city's done and what you can do for yourself now.
Two things. One, for the sake of time and getting to all the questions, we're not going to take follow-up questions on a particular area. What we will do is we'll make ourselves available, though, at the end in the informal time. So if a question wasn't quite, the answer wasn't quite on point of what you wanted, or you had a follow-up, find us afterwards, and we'll take care of that question for you. So we won't be doing follow-ups. Actually, and I've asked Shanna Zuspan to join the panel up here because she is knowledgeable on the financing end, and some of these questions deal with financing. And I'll read the first one that probably is, you're going to be the lead on, I guess, Shanna. If the city needs only 10% for their contribution, but they're attempting to raise 21%, if they receive the full 90% from the state and feds, when will the surplus 11% be refunded to the homeowners?
Sure. I think first of all, I think the premise there that we need only 10% is not necessarily what's being assumed. I mean, our belief at this point is that we need more than 10%. And the reason, again, is that there's going to be competition for these funds. There's a lot of communities out there that are going to be looking to make the same improvements to the changing criteria that we are, and they will be, looking to get portions of those funds. Additionally, as we move forward in the immediate years, the federal funds may take a little bit of time to materialize, and we want to be able to start construction and start making improvements. So in that regard, we know for sure we're going to need more than 10%, particularly in the beginning years. Now, if we end up not needing that money, the board and the council, I'm sure, would consider reductions to the assessment and/or the fee program.
Yep. That's the risk of mentioning numbers in the presentation, because when she mentioned 90%, those of you who are listening closely, she said that was a historical number, not the number that we were quoting, and as she said, it puts us in a better competitive position for that. So.
And just to prove you have to be careful when you're reading, when I first read this card, it says Netherlands. I thought it said Neanderthals, and I thought, what did the Neanderthals do with flooding? Why don't they look into or base their flood protection on the Netherlands model, which has been shown to work when the Corps has failed, i.e. New Orleans and elsewhere? Corps of Engineers. I can talk briefly about the Netherlands model. Anybody else want to field it? The Netherlands has built a series of locks, and oh, Chris, I'm sorry. We have an engineer. Why is a cop going to talk about it?
Chris, I'm sorry. I forgot that you were a researcher. No, that's good. We actually talked a little bit about this during the break. As a lot of people know, the Netherlands, it's been stated in the papers, they've got 500-year, 1,000-year level of protection. And I think the shorter answer is we would love to have that. But it's a process, and that we're taking it a step at a time. One of the slides we showed in our first workshop is that West Sacramento and a lot of the communities in this area don't even have a 100-year level of protection. So our first immediate goal will be get to that. All the evaluations we're doing now will be to get to a 200-year level of protection. And that's, our understanding, is going to become the new urban standard for the entire Central Valley. And then who knows, after that, maybe we continue on to even higher levels of protection. But you've got to take it a step at a time. As you see, there's a lot of money involved, and you need to kind of keep pace with the other communities in the area. It's kind of like the old days, one of the farmers couldn't raise his levee 5 feet higher than his neighbor, because his neighbor would flood first. So it's got to be a regional policy of how we're going to set new standards. So I think the short answer is it would be great to have the level of protection that the Netherlands does, but it's going to be a long process to get there.
We're not going to do any follow-up. Why don't you talk to Chris afterwards, please? We need to kind of stick to that, because we allow one, we'll have to allow others. Sorry about that. Okay, this is one we thought Will might tackle first. Will, you remember this one? Who is guaranteeing that the flood insurance premium will not go up when WSAC is rezoned? All things have a tendency to increase over time. Anybody mention a guarantee?
I don't think there's anybody who can guarantee anything like that. I think that we do know one thing, however, that the rates after the city is remapped will go up, and the rates will go up much higher for those who do not have flood insurance before the rates go up than they will if for the people who try to purchase flood insurance later. So it's on the order of maybe doubling what you would currently pay if you buy it now. If you don't buy it now, it's much, much higher than that, maybe 4 times as much. So again, you have to check it out with your insurance agent, but that's why we're encouraging everyone to get flood insurance now.
Okay. Thank you. And that's the numbers we heard too, was around $350. With respect to flood protection, what suggestion can you make for someone shopping for a home in West Sacramento? Safest places to live, home features to look for in regard to flood protection. I think I'm going to go ahead and field that one. I think you just look for a home that you like. You make sure that you're adequately insured and that you've done the preparation steps you can. Because we're doing all this preparation does not indicate that we think we will have a failure. We just simply feel it's important to educate you so that you can make informed decisions. But this is a wonderful community, beautiful homes, good schools. It's growing, it's going in the right direction, and we would encourage you to think along that lines. Did I miss anything in that one, Chief?
Okay, this is something for those who have a good memory of history. Has the West Sacramento area ever flooded? If so, how long ago? Yeah. So we haven't had a levee breach or a levee topping in your memory. Yeah, and so Ken's right. All of us, I think. Yeah, all of us have been through storm drain problems where a localized area couldn't handle it, or there was debris, leaves in the system, and that sometimes clogged certain streets. Sit up front. That way you're close. That way you're close. If you want to sit in the front row, you closer to the mic. People on TV.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just want to say, I lived just south of Yuba City in 1955, and the levee did fail there in that area, and the water was over the top of our home. So it's real noticeable when you have a levee failure. So.
This is a good one. Any quick advice for making sure that my company is prepared for disaster? Advise on pre-planning for company evacuation. This is a company with 65 people.
If you go to the FEMA website, they have a pamphlet. It's called Are You Ready? And it has a fairly extensive discussion. And there are also a number of other federal websites that have that information.
Question comes up. Can you comment on preparations for prescription medications in an emergency?
What I could say about that is if you're taking medication, one, with your go-to-go bag or your emergency bag, have a checklist and make sure that one of your checklists, other than the go bag, is to grab your medications. And Ziploc bags work great, so have a Ziploc nearby because some people have a lot of medications and more than just a handful. So that would be my recommendation on your medication. And also, you'll have that list of your medications in your bag.
You said in a crisis, the phone system begins to fail. Why depend on reverse 911? Also 500 per hour. How long to call the whole town? Did I say 500? Excuse me. 5,000.
The plans as they are set up for slow flood rise are that if we get into a condition where we think that there's going to be a failure or overtopping, we will let you know to begin with. At this point, the system has not been impacted. We have not had a break, but we have a good chance of there being a break. So rather than like New Orleans, we're going to make that call early, not late. Because if you kind of look at our situation, we are in fact in a bathtub. And if it starts to fill, it's going to fill up. Assuming we can make 5,000 calls an hour and there are 40,000 people in town, 8 hours.
There's other methods that we're not relying just on reverse 911. We talked about the primary method is the emergency notification system we talked about that we're all real familiar with. And so, plus in those kinds of slow rise situations, there's going to be days of advance notice as it rises slowly. And that's the most likely occurrence in this kind of situation. All right, this next question is back on the schools. For schools, you said if it's a flood, north move south, south move north. Okay, we were told, I don't want to give up who told them this, but we were told that an overtopping would put over 20 feet of water in town, and so it would be everywhere. Are there enough buses to get all the kids out of town in one run? I need to make a little disclaimer here. There are many different types of flooding scenarios. The situation the deputy chief was describing in part of his presentation was a north-south scenario, and that's primarily predicated on a breach in a specific location. And the design, the way the city's set up, if there's that kind of situation comes up, it's going to be a half-city scenario under those kinds of conditions, and that was primarily why that scenario was described. In a levee overtopping situation, a slow rise with a levee overtopping situation, the card writer is correct where it's a more generalized situation, and it would affect both sides of the river. And so you remember part of the presentation was so that you'll be directed the proper routes and where to go is tailored to each specific situation. And so obviously in that type of situation, we wouldn't direct people north or south, we'd be directing people out of town. And for instance, one of the primary locations for evacuation, if we had to move everybody out of town, is the Yolo County Fairgrounds in Woodland. That's part of the emergency operations plan for the county. That's some of the highest ground in the area, and so that's a location. So that might be a possible. Don't take that one to the bank and say, the chief said everybody's going to go. I've just given you an example in one scenario, what it might look like. As far as the second part of the question, I don't know the exact bus capacity of the school district and whether they could move every single child out on buses, so we'd have to ask the district that part. Anybody else want to chime in?
Well, I'm sorry. The north-south is, which what I had when it was first explained to me is, and now it makes sense, is the Deepwater Shipping Channel will take some of that, will relieve the pressure if we have a levee break and move that, channel that water. So when I was looking at it as we're in this bowl, some of that water, the water will run down the Deepwater Shipping Channel, and that's why we were able to move the kids from the north to the south or south to the north. And and actually one of the questions, the last question was about the reverse 911 and how long it would take. If we had to start calling with reverse 911 with a levee failure, let's say it's on the south end of town, they're able to start calling the people that are closest to the catastrophe, and those are the first people to get called, and then it spreads out. So although we have 40,000 residents, it's still, it would be only affecting half the population of the city. And like I said, the closest people affected by that would be the first ones called.
The evacuation for the city will be called when we still have 2 feet of freeboard on the levee system. So we're going to try and move you before water starts coming over the top.
Yeah, as we spoke about, there's a difference between a breach and a slow rise. In a slow ride, there's literally days worth of notification, Bill. I mean, as it builds up, we will keep the public notified as to where things are. The breach is the catastrophic. That's where we would rely on all systems, and the reverse 911 is yet but one of many tools. The old arrow in the quiver concept, the more arrows in your quiver, the better off you are. So that's the reason we rely on all those systems. This might be an engineer question. Why not create a man-made lake south of West Sacramento using soil we dig up to provide levees for the new lake?
One of the things we're looking at, Ken had mentioned that we look at interior drainage and how the system operates during flood conditions, but looking something like creating lakes, we have to be very careful in doing that, and you wouldn't want to do it anywhere close to the levee. We are going to need a lot of material for, creating the new levees or laying them back or creating seepage berms or whatnot, but any, depressions in the ground, you wouldn't want it close to the levee, because as we were showing, water's trying to seep under the levee and come up on the other side, and so we'd be, want to keep them a safe distance away from the levee.
This is the last card I have. It has multiple questions on it, so we'll try to deal with them one at a time, and then the Deputy Chief has one more card also. The question is kind of a financing one, so Shannon might have to take the first crack at it. Why can't we increase sales tax instead of property tax for the levee repair and maintenance?
I guess maybe in terms of that question, just a little bit of background. There's an existing assessment district that the Flood Control Agency currently manages that property owners in West Sacramento do pay into in order to improve the levees. And those funds were used to essentially improve the levees to the standards that they currently are in. The proposed new assessment district would essentially replace that existing assessment district. So there is a desire to continue with the existing financing mechanism that we have in place. But, the question always follows is that the right one to use? We did look at some alternative mechanisms. From an equity standpoint, improving the levees and improving the flood protection system is the responsibility of residents and businesses, and an assessment district provides for that mechanism. I'd further add that an assessment district provides a stable source of revenue and one which you can borrow against and provide funds sort of initially to do projects, whereas sales tax revenue does carry with it additional risk and is not quite as stable.
Thank you very much. This question we may have already answered, so I'll refresh your memory on this. It said, what happens if water goes over the levee? That's that slow rise scenario that we described where it tops the levees, and I think we've addressed that. What would happen? There'd be much advanced notice because that happens over a period of weeks and days, and so before the levees ever overtopped, we would be notifying people that they should be evacuating, and you'd be given locations to go. Part of that pre-planning is hopefully most people will have a place already pre-planned where they can go rather than relying on an evacuation location. So, because I'll tell you, if you wait for a government site, there's not going to be one that handles 40,000 people or 45,000 people. So you have to, that's the whole point of the pre-planning and having something for yourself. So that was the answer to that question, so we may have already covered it. I'll take this next one. Why can't we balance the population of people in West Sacramento? I think they mean the growth, because they talked about, it says too many people for us to evacuate. And I think that's exactly what the leadership of the city is doing. As the city council has their vision for the city, obviously they take into account all the facts and information supplied by the subject matter experts on what the area can support, what's the proper growth levels, so that is being done. But the city has much developable land still, and the fact that we could see a flooding scenario in a 0.5 to 1% time each year is not in and of itself a reason to stop the development up to the limits where it's already planned, which is a prudent level. So that's already really being done. And the last one on this card, if water goes over the levee, west or Sac side or west Sac side, I think we've talked about this one too, where will the water go? It needs a place to go. Very good observation. It obviously does need a place to go. And as we talked about in a slow rise levee topping situation, it would spill both sides because the levees are roughly equal height, and that's the design. You don't build yours higher at the detriment of your neighbor. And so it would go obviously to the lowest areas. And if you think about it, West Sacramento is one of the low areas. We're like a little tub. I think somebody described it, Bill maybe, described it as a little bathtub. And then think about the other side of the river, what's been in the news. Everybody talks about the Pocket area, the Natomas area. Those, even, you remember, some of you can think back, it's not too long ago, out there, the Rio Linda area. Those areas are the low-lying areas, and that's where the water would go on that side. On our side, it would be here in West Sacramento. Anybody have anything to add to that?
Yeah, ultimately, it's going to go down the deep water channel. Once it has time.
It's a very creative thinker, good, an interesting idea. With 3-story townhouses being the talk of the future, how about 3 mini houses so that the uppers will be independent of the lower, and I think what they're talking about is in the 3-story housing configuration, making the different levels independent of one another. And that's a good idea, but remember, we would prefer you to evacuate as opposed to trying to ride out a flood, because there's a lot of contamination, your power is cut off, all that. So we would much prefer for you to leave the area than to try to ride out a flood, even if you do have a multi-story home. And then one, I think this is for Sergeant Tyler. We brought him in. Hopefully he gets one question tonight. Where are you recommending that people evacuate to when a primary source of concern is a Sacramento which travels near I-5? What about the fact that the rest of Sacramento could also be dealing with flooding, which would further complicate evacuations?
As they have spoke about earlier, between a breach and a low-rise evacuation, the low-rise obviously is going to affect us as well as Sacramento. So I guess you could rest assured that we would not send you into harm's way. meaning that if Sacramento was experiencing a flood as well as us, your evacuation point would probably be to the west or to the north. We wouldn't send you into another area where they're dealing with an emergency of their own. On the other, a levee failure, a breach of the levee, the thought is that if it happened on the north end of town, the people on the south end of town would be less likely to have an immediate emergency during that levee, with the deep water channel working as a barrier between the north and south end of town, and vice versa if the levee breach was to occur on the south end of town. So I guess to answer your question, anywhere that it occurs, we would make a very conscious effort not to send you into another hazardous area. So.
Okay, I think these are assessment-based questions. Are there provisions for those on fixed or lower income?
The current formula looks at some factors that include, the size of the parcel, the type of land use of the parcel, essentially an estimate of the size of the structure and the land use. We have not gotten to the point where we've taken into account kind of whether or not we're going to look at different provisions for different folks. But those factors I mentioned are in the existing formula.
Are the assessments based on 40,000 population?
Yeah, I mean, basically it looks at the existing land use patterns in the city right now. So, whether a parcel's vacant or residential or commercial. So that would include the current population of the city.
And finally, I'm going to try to interpret this one a little bit. Was public input considered, and has that been a consideration in determinations?
In terms of the assessment, we are doing a whole process to look at, the public process. The formula that's being used is really based on essentially ensuring that each parcel's assessment would be proportional to the amount of special benefit that parcel would receive from the proposed improvements. There has been one workshop, there's tonight's workshop, and then the May 15th workshop will focus on the assessment. And the other thing I want to add is that the whole concept behind a proposed assessment district is really a vote of the property owner. So ultimately it is in the hands of the community.
Okay. Well, this was well planned. We closing right on time. We planned this to be about 90 minutes, from about 6:30 to 8, and we're there. We thank you very much for your attendance, your participation. We're going to be available, so come up and talk to any and all of us, and we'll try to answer your questions. Thank you very much.